Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Kurt podcast. Today we are covering Thyroid Lab Values. So it's not going to be too long of a podcast today, but we're really going to dive into a full thyroid panel because you wouldn't believe how often people come in saying, "Oh, I had my thyroid checked. It looks great. My doctor said everything's fine. It's really good. I don't have a thyroid problem." And then we look at their labs, and more often than not, they literally run one test, TSH, which ultimately is a terrible thyroid test. It's not even a thyroid test to begin with. It's a brain test, but it doesn't tell us anything about thyroid hormone. If by some chance you get a doctor that's going to run more than one test, they run a free T4. And you might ask, well, why do they run a free T4? Well, free T4 is the only marker they use to give people thyroid hormone. So they're really only looking at two tests, TSH and free T4, because they only have one strategy. They have a hammer. They're going to hit every single aspect of the thyroid with thyroid hormone. That's it. Nothing else. So free T4 does guide you on the fact of how you're dosing thyroid hormone. But what if you don't have a T4 problem? Well, that's a big deal. So when someone comes in and sees us at my office, we're going to look at your full thyroid. If we don't look at your full thyroid, we don't know what's going on. And we'll even get into the body environment of the thyroid, which, of course, we run in every single person as well when it comes to thyroid, but is a little indirectly related to the thyroid. But today we're really covering what are the main thyroid tests, the specific ones for the thyroid gland with the specifics of the thyroid hormone and its function. So without further ado, we're going to dive into, initially, yes, we do run a TSH. I did mention it's not a very good marker. What it does tell you, if it's high, really high, we're talking, really over about 2 or 3, it's gonna tell you, yes, something's going on with your thyroid. We need to figure it out. We need to understand what's happening. But it's kind of more of a red light. It kind of dings and tells you, okay, something's here. We need to dive in a little deeper. I've seen lab values get up to 6 that say it's normal. If your TSH is a 6, you 100% have a thyroid problem. We just need to figure out what. And odds are it's going to be very obvious. I have a family member who I think her TSH was in the 6s, and her doctor said it's okay. We can't do anything about it. You're not abnormal. 100% abnormal. That is a problem. Just because your lab says it's not a problem doesn't mean it's not a problem. A TSH of 6 is a huge issue. I look at it, a TSH of over 2, we have to ask the question, you might not have a thyroid problem, but you definitely don't have optimal thyroid function. That's 100% for sure. So one of the things which we're going to touch on a little, and coming up in a little bit, is the secondary function of TSH, or one of the functions we could say. TSH helps your body, or signals to your body, to absorb iodine. So in many cases where we find the thyroid hormones themselves, the T4 and the T3s, actually look pretty good, but TSH is still running a little high. A lot of times we do find out that it's more related to iodine than it is a thyroid problem. And when it comes to taking iodine, there is what we call a bell curve of change where the TSH will actually go up before it goes back down. And this is where you need to run the full thyroid, because if you ran the full thyroid, you would see that hormone function is improving, but yet TSH looks worse. And if we only look at it from a very narrow 1 test or 2 test scale, we're not going to see this type of thing. So TSH, you can, I'm sure many of you watching this will have a TSH, at least in the last year. You can look at it. If it's over 2, you probably have a sluggish thyroid, or minimally, we need to dive a little deeper into your thyroid. And anyone telling you, oh, your thyroid is fine, well, they don't know. They didn't test anything beyond that. So that's something we really need to dive into. The next one we look at is total T4. So not just the free T4. Free T4 would be what they call unbound T4. So that would be the T4 that's directly usable in your blood. We want to look at total T4. Is your body making enough T4? And T4 is kind of an interesting one because they do have studies out where the people that were hypothyroid and normal thyroid function, good thyroid function in this case, because it was a foreign study, they were about the same. They were about a 7.2, 7.3. Well, we use total T4 in ratio form. So we're going to look at total T4 in relation to total T3. And we should have about 55 to 65 times more T4 than T3. What that tells us is we're making enough T4 and we're converting it to the active, or there's just the T3 form in a perfect ratio. So really, I use total T4 in terms of a ratio. So we need to compare it to our total T3, not free T3, not reverse T3, total T3. Next, we have free T4. Now, free T4 is a good marker for do you have enough T4 in your body? Over 1.38. That is our minimum cutoff, 1.38, up to about 1.8. Over 1.8, we might be, kind of enter a hyperthyroid state, which is a different kind of circumstance. We can talk about that if we get enough interest in another later podcast, but that is a different circumstance. But over 1.38, or rounded up even 1.4. Under that, we know if your free T4 is under 1.33, there's a high chance you have at least 3 markers of metabolic syndrome, or what we could say pre-diabetes. So that's a big deal. When your thyroid is dysfunctioning, your risk of diabetes goes up. And that's not a big thing. So what are risk factors? Obesity, high homocysteine, high CRP, high blood sugar, high A1C. So we got a lot of different markers related to T4. But that's one many of you watching this will have a free T4 marker. So go ahead and look at it. If it's below 1.38, we know we have an issue. We need to dive deeper. We need to figure this out. All right, next we have our total T3. So there's an interesting study. I can link it. If people are interested, you can shoot me a message and I'll definitely send that out. But it talks about when you're under 90, so I think this would be nanograms per deciliter in your total T3, the chance of you being hypothyroid is really high. So I'll be honest with you. We run total T3, and very rarely do we see it over 90. I would say probably 70% of the time we're seeing it below 90, which tells us you're not converting T4 to T3 very well, or you're not using T3. You have a conversion issue. So maybe we need to take a step back here and say, well, how does the thyroid system work? Well, initially we have TSH. TSH comes from our brain, signals to our thyroid gland to make predominantly T4. About 90% of the thyroid hormones we make are T4. Now, T4 is not necessarily usable by the body. It's kind of, think of it as like the storage of thyroid hormones floating around the body. And when our body needs T3, which is our active hormone, when it needs thyroid hormone, it will convert T4 to T3. It's one enzyme step. The predominant tissues that happens, which it can happen in every single cell in the body, because thyroid hormone is what they call a nuclear hormone, meaning every cell in the body uses thyroid hormone. So every cell needs to have the availability and function to be able to use it. So that T4 to T3 conversion happens at the tissue level. So now we're starting to learn something. Now we're understanding that thyroid hormone is not just about your thyroid gland making thyroid hormone. The biggest part of thyroid hormone is your tissue's ability to convert T4 to T3 and then ultimately use T3. So that is what we're looking at here is, we already kind of talked about the ratio of T4 to T3. Now we're going to be diving into, is your body using T3 appropriately? So under 90 tells us no, you're not using it appropriately. Under 78 means you have a massive hypothyroid problem. And these are more studies than what we're doing actively in the office. The other part of are you using T3 very efficiently is the ratio of total T3 to reverse T3. So reverse T3 we use kind of like total T3. You use it more in a ratio sense. And you should have about 12 times more total T3 than reverse T3, plus or minus 2. So about a 10 to 14 times more total T3 than reverse T3. This is a marker we see in almost every single person. We see people are not converting T4 to usable T3 very efficiently at all. A lot of people, they're converting it to reverse T3, which is inactive T3. Now, the next question might be, why does the body do that? Well, the body does that to protect you, because thyroid hormone is like high octane rocket fuel in your body. What happens when you have too much high octane rocket fuel, too much active T3 in your body? Well, some people call that a Graves' disease, or it's a hyperthyroid state if your cells aren't ready for it, and your cells explode. Simply stated, they start exploding, just like your car would if you put high octane rocket fuel in it. It might drive really fast for a few blocks, maybe even half a mile, but it's going to start exploding. It's going to be not a good circumstance. So we really want to make sure these ratios are good. So far we're learning the thyroid's a lot about ratios. Are we making enough hormone? Are we converting enough hormone? Are we using enough hormone? These are all really big things. So we have another marker, free T3. So this would be like free T4. This is the unbound. This is the ready available T3. We already learned we don't necessarily need this marker. It's not as important as some of the other ones. It's not as important as some of the ratios, but about 3.4 to 3.8 is generally good. So a pretty narrow range. Like I said, with Graves' disease, we don't want too much usable T3, just like we don't want too little. T3 is very narrow. It's a very narrow range of ideal. And the interesting part is when you give the body T3, it doesn't work very well. So helping your body make and use T3 is of utmost importance, because taking T3 in most cases does not help the body. And actually, we have a full down regulation after a few months, and we end up worse off than where we started. All right. Next, we have to look at thyroid antibodies. Thyroid antibodies are markers of autoimmune function. So we have TPO, thyroid peroxidase is the main one. And also we have thyroglobulin antibody, which is a protein that helps transport thyroid hormones. Both are iodine dependent. TPO even more so than thyroglobulin antibody. So when we see an autoimmune condition, we know that A, there's many factors going on. B, it's an immune system problem. Our immune system is attacking our thyroid and our thyroid function, not so much a dysfunction of the thyroid gland itself. So we have to treat it as an immune system problem. And I'm sure many of you watching this, if you know or are autoimmune yourself, diet ends up being a big thing. We can't be eating foods that are stimulating our immune system, like gluten and dairy tend to be very, very common. We need to start getting our body into a nice rhythm. Sleep, helping stress, doing other things like that. But ultimately, we need to feed the thyroid correctly, and iodine ends up being a major, major player with this. So, iodine. We run a serum iodine just to see how much iodine's in the blood in every single person. And I will tell you, I can count on one hand. Well, actually, I don't need any hands to count how many people have had sufficient, perfect iodine on day one. Wild. It's wild to think that. We're in one of the most advanced countries, if not the most advanced country in the world, and I'm still searching for someone to have sufficient iodine. Interesting. So what we do find is about 40% of people, this is more my office data, and I think if we look it up, it would be around 30. I think they think 30, 35% might be the number of people are diagnosably deficient in iodine. And I want you to challenge some of you, go ahead and Google what iodine deficiency leads to. Very interesting. It's low IQ. So not having iodine in your body leads to you being dumb. Leads number one cause of low IQ. And, and low brain function, we could say, in the entire planet. So iodine is a huge thing, and it's been systematically kind of wiped out in our medical establishment. We're going to have our next podcast is going to be on iodine, kind of covering more in depth, because we could talk about iodine, for the next week. and it would still only be scratching the surface. But iodine is a huge, huge player. It is absolutely necessary for the thyroid. And if we think about it, what is T4 and T3? Why do they have the numbers? You know, testosterone, estrogen, other hormones don't have numbers in the name. But it's the number of iodine molecules. T4 has 4 iodine molecules and a tyrosine backbone. T3 has 3. So when we talk about T4 to T3 conversion, what are they doing? Is they're taking away one of the iodines. And that's as simple as it is. We need iodine for thyroid function. So what is depleting iodine? Well, our diet, it's been systematically taken out of the diet. So we don't have iodine in our diet. And no, iodized salt is not a good form. It was designed to get rid of goiters. We're talking parts per million to potentially get rid of a goiter versus milligrams upon milligrams to lead to full body sufficiency. So full body sufficiency is very different than the RDA. The RDA talks about, they theorize it was about the thyroid gland itself. Well, we know now every tissue in the body needs iodine, specifically the skin. If you're a woman, your breast tissue and sex organs use a phenomenal amount of iodine. In fact, it gets rid of fibrocystic breasts. That's interesting. But we need to address iodine because it is a part of high TSH. It is a part of positive thyroid antibodies. And quite ultimately, it's impossible to reach optimal health without iodine. So iodine is something we look into. And I'm glad it's becoming more popular now because it's really a big game changer in a lot of people. And all right. So that kind of sums up the list of tests we run specifically for the thyroid. So if we counted that up, let me see how many we had there. I think we had about 6 or 7. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess 9 if you consider the thyroid antibodies as 2 separate tests instead of kind of a package. A lot of them come together with package when you order the blood work. But that's just our thyroid gland. So now we got you assessed. We got a function. We got a picture of what your thyroid gland itself is doing. The next part of this, which we're going to cover in an upcoming podcast, is we have to look at the body environment, the environment that this thyroid hormone is working in, because we learned that T4 to T3 conversion happens in every cell of the body. There's 4 predominant areas in the body. Most of this happens in our brain, our muscle mass, our liver, and our kidneys. So we have to basically look in depth into those. How we look into muscle mass is we look at total body muscle percentage, and we'll cover that when we go into the body environment. But we're talking, there's a whole host of other tests that are, some of them are common, some of them are not common in standard blood work to look at. So this is just the beginning of, I want people to start understanding thyroid testing is complex. It's the most complex hormone in the body, in a sense of it's a nuclear hormone. Every cell in your body uses thyroid hormone. It has a big link to deficiency states, deficiency in certain nutrients like iodine, like selenium, which we'll touch on with the body environment, and other different things, and specifically iron. So there's a lot of areas with thyroid. So basically, if we took one hormone and really dove into it, the thyroid would be the hormone to optimize every single aspect of your body, because it's impossible to have optimal thyroid function and not have your full body be healthy in all ways. So until next time, everyone, we'll talk again.